Bob, you were in the 1963 expedition to Berger. Can you tell me a bit about it?
We were well organised on our trip. There were three vehicles went. There were Pearce's Land Rover, and in that there were Pearce and his wife, me, Jed Scott, and Jeff Morgan. And then Bob Wright had a Land Rover, and he took Nigel Harper, Ron Ferguson, and Mike Boone. And Nobby Booth had one of the original Bedford Dormobiles with the tram seats, wooden tram seats, but that were for his furniture business. But he took that, and he took his new wife on his honeymoon, Marie, and he had Steve Wynne Roberts and Alan Clegg and Bobby Toogood, I think, yeah. And the idea was there was a diver in each vehicle in case of breakdowns and one didn't get there. And we all left work on Friday night, drove down to Dover, had a couple of hours sleep at the roadside and appeared in Dover for the ferry. And we actually met and had a few words with George Corns, who found Lancaster Hall. He was just coming back from France. And then we got in France, and all of a sudden we were in this village, and Pearce is up and down, I must get some hacksaw blades. So I said, what do you want them for, Ken? He said, well, we haven't got permission, he said, and they might have gated it since last year, which was the first inkling that we had, that everything wasn't as organised as we thought it was. But the problem was the insurance. The mayor of Angers wanted cover to get anybody out. I think it's about £1 million or something. And to get permission to go down, you had to show this insurance. Well, Ken had somehow blagged saying that he'd show it him when they arrived, you know. So we got down to Grenoble, and on a Saturday night after driving all day, and we had a meal, and then we went up to the plateau and ferried stuff across and got down the hall before anybody asked to see this insurance. And Steve Wynne Roberts' feet were raw. He'd done about 20 trips across the plateau carrying 4 bags at a time. He was an enormously strong man, but his feet were in ribbons. And I got bollocked with Pearce made a meal down in Cairn Hall for everybody while they were coming down the holiday slides, which still had ice on them. That was in end of July. And got bollocked with Pearce because I'd used I'd used a tin per man of food, and we were only allocated half a tin. This stuff that had been donated by some firm or other, but it was supposed to be beef and something, but it was gristle and something. More gristle than beef. And we had all these in bags. Oh gosh, bags. So we had a couple of hours sleep there, and then the next morning, but it might actually be night on the surface, I don't know what time it was, he sent me, Jed Scott and Nobby Booth to start laddering while they organised all the gear in Cairn Hall and got the rest of it down from the bottom of the entrance pitch. So it said, oh, every pitch had a numbered bag. Well, some had 3. You know, there was sort of 12A, 12B and 12C if it was a big pitch to get all the gear in. So we sorted all the stuff out to get to the River Gallery. And he said, oh, just take a few more bags, and stuck all these, and so 3 of us set off with 38 bags on the meanders. So we did the meanders about 10 times each, you know, ferrying it about. But we did start losing a bit on all the pitches, but we were also using this reconstituted rope because it was cheap. And if that got wet, you had to bend it round your knee to tie a knot in it. It was terrible. But the idea with that, we left that in, that was abandoned there. I know it's terrible littering the place up, but that was the philosophy in those days. And so we got going down there, and we had a ladder break. And what had happened with these ladders, me and Alan and Clegg had arranged to borrow 10 ladders, but there'd been a bit of a snag, and we got let down with that. We couldn't borrow them. We had to make some in a hurry. And Ken and Jed Scott had put these tellurific sleeves on, and either they'd pressed them too tight and they were broken inside the sleeve, or also Ken had they'd tinned them to cut the wire, and as it was galvanised wire, they had trouble soldering it, so Ken produced some acid and dipped the ends in to take the galvanising off. Now, whether it was that made it break or what, but we had one break, but it was on, I think it's called the surveyor's pitch. It's only a smallish one. Is it about 50 foot, something like that? And it broke before, I think Nobby was going to go down first, and he just put his foot on and it broke. So we just lashed it together with some rope and carried on. So then we got down, we got to the river gallery, and everybody had enough there. We actually camped at the entrance, at the start of the river gallery that night. And I remember, after we'd been all these hours in the meanders, you came out into the river gallery and you got the impression that you were coming out of a cave at night. You got this impression of space round you. And I've done it often up in the Dales, you know, you come out at night and you realise you're out, but it's all pitch black, just the same as underground, but you know you're out. And we felt that we're out there at the river gallery. So we carried on ferrying down, and then we had the infamous carbide explosion, where we were down short pitches, all the bags were thrown down, and at the Little General they were lowering this down, and this bag slipped out of the sling actually and crashed down, and it had a 14-pound tin of carbide in, which started hissing. And so as soon as they heard the hissing, Ken rushed up to it and bent down to examine it with his carbide light. And there was only him and Jed Scott there, and Jed says it blew, Jed was further back, it blew him off his feet, but it blew Ken Pearce about 15 foot. And Jed says he was unconscious and lying face down in the water. So Jed dragged him out, and Ken then limped off down to Camp 2 to lick his wounds. And I remember quite a few of the people, well, 3 or 4, really had already lost interest in the expedition. And one of them said with great satisfaction, well, if he's injured, we'll just have to knock it on the head then and go out. But anyway, Ken recovered, but Jed sprained his ankle. And when we got down to Camp 1, it was, not Camp 2, sorry, where he got to, near the Hall of 13. What a sight that is, magnificent. And Ken was saying, how are you? When I went down, he heard my voice, he said, how are you doing, Bob? I said, I'm absolutely knackered. Oh, next day he gave us all a pep talk, saying, look, we've used nearly half the tackle up, so there was a lot less to carry now. We're going to leave 2 of the diving cylinders here and just take the rest. And we're going to leave some of the lead weights as well, so there's less to carry. And in the meantime, he said, Gillibrand and Jed Scott, more effort required. I think that was because I said I was knackered. And all this pep talk went on, and we carried on then to Camp 2, and Lake Kudu was dry as a bone. Got to Camp 2 after down Claudine's, and we camped more or less at the bottom of Claudine's, not the original Camp 2, which is at the bottom of the rubble slope. And then next day off we went to get to the bottom, the initial first party, carrying quite a bit of gear. And we got down the Grand Cascade and we arrived at the Monkey, and everybody's wet through, cold, worn out and weary, and we're all sat there. And so Ken arranges for Jed to go on the traverse and drop the infamous ice peg into the behind this flake, and Jed was set off down and the ladder broke. But this time it was actually two ladders that broke, the right hand side on one side and the left hand side on the upper ladder. The old ladder went, and so Jed was lowered down and he's sat in a goer pool. So he rigged it again, and I went down this ladder, but I'd taken the precaution then of lashing lots of choline around and in case it broke again. And I got down to this goer pole and Jed said, "Give me that bloody rope," and off he disappeared. And then, much to my dismay, the ladder disappeared shortly after, and I'm sat in this bloody goer pole under this freezing cold water for about an hour and a half, and I'm watching Pearce above me flitting about like a giant bat on this ladder doing a pendulum traverse on these ladders that had already broken. And he's doing this pendulum traverse to get out across and across the other side from the Monkey. Anyway, he rigged it. Then he very kindly dropped a ladder and a rope down to me and said, I got back up and he said, "Oh right," he said, "can you lie me down, Hurricane?" I said, "Buh." He said, "Get back up there." I was absolutely frozen because I'd also got a wetsuit, especially it cost a fortune. I'd stuck it all together myself, but sent for the neoprene and the pattern and whatnot. And we found that wetsuits are fine when you're moving about, but when you're wet and doing nothing, they're a death trap. They really are. So I was revived a bit up on top, and they all went down. They went down to the sump, did some of them, and left the diving gear in the dry oxbow. So next day, coming back out, we noticed on the duck above the Monkey that the little duck, there was less airspace than when we went in, and going up gaseous, it was a very difficult climb with all the extra water. So it must have rained on the surface. So next morning when we're making breakfast, Pearce sent two down to see if the water had dropped. Unfortunately it had, so down we went, down the Monkey and down the dreaded Hurricane, well named. And we had a child's dinghy, but that wasn't for us, that was for the diving gear. And we floated down the canal. I think we must have streamed a line out with this dinghy, but I remember that when you touched the sides it was all shale, you couldn't get a grip of anything, it just broke off. And we arrived at the sump, and Steve Wynne-Roberts was the backup diver, and Pearce said, we're all absolutely shattered, and Pearce said something like, "Well, let's get this over with," and off he went. And within probably 5 minutes or more there was a big tug on the line saying he was through somewhere. So we were a bit elated at that, and then a few minutes later Pearce comes back and says, "It's enormous there, it's enormous." He said, there's another sump a bit further on. He said, "But it's like a railway tunnel." They were very, elated, and so he said, "Come on then, let's get out," and we somehow managed to get back up the canal, probably pulling on this choline line if we'd put one through. We must have done. And back up to Camp 2, where, at the top of the Monkey there was a reception party. The rest of the team were on the lifelines and whatnot to help us out. And we get to Camp 2 and limped out, and we actually spent the night at the bottom of Garby's well, we slept there. And the day after, we could hear Pete Smith shouting down the shaft to us. And there'd been a great lot of consternation because we'd been out of touch for 12 days, and in that 12 days, possibly this rain that had brought it up the day before, some people camping down the valley had been washed away and drowned. So everybody was very worried about us. But anyway, the bad pennies turned up. And, we came out and had a few hours sleep. Went down to the Mason Forest there, had a meal that lasted about 3 hours. We were absolutely starving. This 3-hour meal, oh, wonderful. And then a long drive back to catch the ferry and back to work on Monday. Yeah. But we had out of the ill-gotten gains that Pearce made with interviews and whatnot, we all got refunded our money that we'd paid into the expedition. We'd all paid £30 each. And to give you an idea, in those days, to me that was nearly 3 weeks' wages. And I was a tradesman, earning a tradesman's wage. And I think I was about £11 or £12 a week.
Bob, what can you tell us about the ladders in the Berger in 1963?
Yeah, well, the infamous pull up the ladders, I'm above. What happened about that, the reason that Nobby Booth and Bobby Toogood went out was not only the carbide tin had been punctured, a tin of paraffin had. We noticed this when we were eating paraffin flavoured ready break. And when we checked the supplies, we had very little paraffin for the Primus stove, so it was decided that they'd go out. And I think Pearce picked Nobby Booth because he was on his honeymoon. So they went out and he had but I was there when he was giving them the instructions. He said, get out, get some paraffin, have a couple of hours kit and get back here as quick as you can with an intact tin of paraffin. And those were his instructions. And this, well, Pearce wouldn't do that. He was a very hard taskmaster, but he wasn't a madman. And he wouldn't say, pull the ladders up, then people can't escape. And I think all this rumour started on the 67 expedition when there were a lot of demoralised people with the Mossdale job a week or two before, and people had started drifting out, and Pearce were waking up and finding the people weren't there that were there when he'd gone to sleep. And it's sort of a rumour that's grown over the years, and people think it's a fact. But it certainly isn't, and he wouldn't do that, Ken, I know that for a fact.